It that alters sanity greets you. After an initial 50 hours of playtime when Victoria 3 launched, I decided to spend some time analyzing the data files while waiting for version 1.1 to come out. This game has many highly interconnected mechanics. It's hard to get the big picture from just tooltips. So I have produced various diagrams to better understand one of the higher aims of the simulation: how a country's economy shapes its politics. First, what gives your population political strength? Broadly speaking, wealth. Granted, standard of living isn't always equal to wealth, and a pop may be politically inactive due to low literacy too. Such details aside, what is the relation between a pop's wealth and how much strength they have? This graph is that relation. Wealth level on the x-axis, political strength on the y-axis. A curved growth with a couple turning points. At 10 or less wealth, the poor have very little strength. At wealth 15, pops start taking off in political strength. At wealth 30, they take a noticeable jump. But what do you need to push wealth high? Wealth goes up by fulfilling material needs. When a pop can buy enough goods to meet their current wealth needs, they go up to the next level. What new goods do pops need as they work their way up from poverty? Let's start with food and related goods. These charts have wealth level on the x-axis and need quantity on the y-axis. Everyone needs to eat. The starving make do with less. At wealth 15, pops plateau off at 200 basic food. Between wealth 20 and 30, they start wanting luxury food instead of the basics. As they grow decadent, pops want to feast on obscene amounts of luxury food. Starting at wealth 15, pops want luxury drinks too. And again, in obscene quantities as they grow opulent. Intoxicants somewhat level off at 75 between wealth 12 and 20, but then climb to a second plateau at wealth 30. Which goods meet these needs? These diagrams show each need and what good can fulfill them, plus what era they become available from. Grain and fish are the staple of commoners. The wealthy want them turned into groceries. Or they can subsist on sugar alone, apparently. Well, not quite. There's a mix of weight to good substitution, so you'll still need a little variety in luxury foods. Then there's drinks. Pops who can't afford to drink tea, coffee, or wine are considered unworthy of political strength. You must be a cultured consumer to be taken seriously. Note that wine does not count as an intoxicant. Vic 3 pops don't drink wine to get drunk. Next, let's look at heating. Everyone needs to stay warm and cook food. Apparently, Vic 3 pops don't increase their heating needs depending on the climate. The starving make do with less, but in general, pops stabilize their demand for heating at wealth 10. Simple clothing reverses trend around wealth 10 as pops start wanting properly sewn clothes, exclusively so by wealth 15. You may be surprised to see the decadent don't want any standard clothing at wealth 40. Luxury clothes is part of luxury items. Until then, pops want a steady supply of regular clothes. For a freshly developing country, chances are pops will be burning wood or fabric to stay warm. Coal will be in demand for your industry, and only the whaling industry can supply oil that early on. As for clothing, Note that standard clothes can meet the needs of the starving and the stable alike. There's no harm getting a textile industry running early. At Wealth 15, pops will refuse to wear rags. You have to be dressed decently for your political opinion to be taken seriously. Now on to items. The destitute start needing crude items at Wealth 5, but from Wealth 10 they replace them with standard household items. At Wealth 15, they ditch crude items in favor of luxuries. The rich plateau off on their household item needs, but develop ever-demanding tastes for luxury items as they become opulent. While starving pops forfeit all furniture, struggling pops will make do with a bunch of wood to make their own. They'll accept proper furniture if they can afford it, and by Wealth 15, exclusively demand them. Your house needs to be properly furnished with a dash of luxury for your political opinion to be taken seriously. Being able to dress well for special occasions is important too for politics. Oh, and having access to paper so you can write too. How do you participate in politics if you don't have something to read or write on? The final needs graphs. In abject poverty, services are entirely unnecessary. Pops start wanting services from Wealth 10 onwards. Civilized life is too complicated to handle alone. People need to delegate tasks like figuring out their taxes. At Wealth 15, pops start wanting to move around. At Wealth 20, they want to communicate too, keeping in touch with relatives who settled in other cities. From Wealth 30, pops begin wanting art. This final need grows obscenely fast as they become decadent. Note that all those needs on the last slide can be met with the services good. Until Era 2, most pops will be relying exclusively on output from the urban centers to meet these needs. You can't manually build urban centers. This limits how much supply there is of services. Once you have a railway network running, you can get more pops beyond Wealth 15. Trains empower your pops to speak for themselves by getting to important events. This is also why adding a consumption tax to services is so lucrative. There's so much demand for it, but only from the somewhat well-off. That tax will limit your pops advancing in wealth. So far, we've only looked at what generates political strength. It gets distributed to interest groups, which then sets their clout, which in turn is how the chance to enact laws is calculated. Some interest groups have a multiplier when calculating clout. Notably, the landowners in repressive societies have a lot coming from old laws favoring them. The criteria for which pops support what interest groups is complicated enough that it's basically code in the data files. Still, some broad insights can be drawn. In these diagrams, each pop type is divided into 3 categories for supporting a particular interest group: banned, allowed, and preferred. The arrows between boxes have no meaning. Also, note that slaves aren't allowed to partake in politics even if the analyzed logic doesn't specifically exclude them. The armed forces will accept any pop type support but prefers those employed in the military or the aristocrats. Caveat: if not one of these 3 preferred types, a pop that's discriminated against won't support the armed forces. Next, the devout. Provided a pop follows the state religion, any are welcome to support them. Note that peasants prefer to support the devout, provided they're politically active in the first place. Literacy decreases support for the devout. What buildings create jobs for the clergy? They are required for the spiritual needs of rural workers. Also, subsistence farms have aristocrat and clergymen as owners, highlighted in green. Eventually, socialism in Era 3 unlocks the Council Republic law, which has peasants owning the subsistence farms instead, but that's not a concern in the beginning. Even if you have zero agriculture in your economy, there will always be some clergymen due to urban centers having churches. The clergy can be part of administrative workers too. Still, the gradual reduction of subsistence buildings means if you want to enact some laws in the devout favor, you may want to consider getting those done sooner when they have more clout. The industrialists are an exclusive interest group. Capitalists are expected, but engineers and shopkeepers can also join. Not shown. Capitalists are 4 times as likely as the other 2 types to support this interest group. Where do these capitalists come from? There is no building that requires capitalists for producing goods. They are owners. Some buildings may require public ownership instead of private ownership for capitalists to come in. Point is, they will take the dividends from buildings to get wealthy, generate clout, and possibly contribute to the investment pool depending on your laws. The more humble industrialist is the engineer, a skilled worker needed in increasingly more buildings as technology advances and more progressive production methods are adopted. Then there's the shopkeeper, usually found in urban centers, but also gets employed if certain buildings are producing luxury goods. Rich clientele want professional service when picking out that right luxury. Not shown here is how trade centers can also generate shopkeeper vacancies if they're using merchant guilds. The intelligentsia requires at least 25% literacy to join, and peasants are outright banned no matter how literate. Interestingly, clergymen can join this interest group, which has an anti-clerical ideology. Let's focus on 2 pop types that may form a large number of this group's members. The bureaucrat is required in only a few buildings, but many more if buildings are government run under a command economy in Era 4. If your goal is to move your economy away from the grip of industrialists and landowners, this is one late game way to shake up the political landscape. The humble clerk will be present in a few administrative buildings. Everywhere the bureaucrat is needed, so too is the clerk, in addition to the urban center and the trade center. That last one is only if you don't have merchant guilds. Note that if your state has a lot of ports, there will be a sizable population of bureaucrats and clerks who will bolster the intelligentsia. Landowners are another exclusive club, typically the most powerful interest group for less progressive starts. The aristocrat is 4 times as likely to support this group than the other allowed types. Many players in such starts will want to weaken this group to pass more progressive laws, or at least to remove traditionalism. The only building where aristocrats actually contribute to work is government administration, provided hereditary bureaucrats is the law. Otherwise, they are owners of the rural economy. Even when publicly traded, the aristocrat will still have the job of collecting dividends from agricultural buildings. The other ways of ownership are not available in the early game. This makes them stubborn obstacles to outright remove. The petty bourgeois is a somewhat exclusive group. Members must work at one of these buildings down below, which excludes many pop types who have no jobs there. Members also need to be of the primary culture. Clerks and shopkeepers are the preferred members. These are the middle managers of the cities. The rural folk exclude pops working in the city and also owners at the top. Preferred are the folk working the land or looking after the spiritual needs of those that do. Remember, laborers are low-skill workers, and farming takes a lot of know-how. Don't look down on the skilled peasant just because they're at the bottom of the social ladder. The final interest group, trade unions. The counterpart to rural folk, only those working in urban jobs at the lower rungs can be members. This means shopkeepers are banned too. Preferred are machinists and then laborers. Their attraction is reduced to a quarter until Era 2 when egalitarianism and labor movement get researched. A challenge for oppressive states that want to industrialize without empowering the lowly grunts. You may be surprised to find farmers as allowed. See, the data files didn't ban rubber plantation workers from trade union membership. That won't be relevant until Era 3, and even then you likely won't have rubber plantations as the majority of farmer employment. Most farmer vacancies will come from orthodox rural buildings. The machinist is the midway point between low-skill labor and the high-skill engineer, the worker who fits themselves to the rhythm of Victorian-era machines. Even in the first era, there are many buildings requiring this job, and the opportunities increase as more progressive production methods are adopted. Finally, qualifications. How do POPs move between job types? What's required to get skilled employees filling those new vacancies? I wondered what the career path of POPs were. I present to you the career matrix of the Vic3 POP. Discrimination is not accounted for in this diagram. Thicker arrows mean greater multipliers for promotion, but POPs aren't constrained to these paths. This is how the lowly laborer can work their way up, assuming there are vacancies offering lucrative wages. Either the laborer has the wealth to become a farmer and have a secure living off the land, or they get educated to open other avenues to wealthy jobs. Many jobs place a restriction on serfs joining, but that only applies to peasants. I'll need to confirm, but I believe a serf peasant can become a laborer just fine. To become a shopkeeper, a POP needs at least 5 wealth, and any above that boosts chances of getting this promotion. Meantime, the engineer needs a minimum of 20% literacy, with any beyond that, plus wealth, helping the promotion chances. The aristocrat prefers to retire as an officer, an academic, or a cleric, though their income would have to be desperate to make such a career change. So, to conclude, getting POPs past Wealth 15 requires various luxury goods they did without when poor and gives them a stronger political voice. Whether they are politically active is another matter, but literacy will help them engage in politics. Whether you want that or not will influence how you grow your economy. Do you focus on rural or urban jobs? Because that will influence which interest groups seize clout. Plan that around which laws you want to enact and when. Feedback below would be appreciated. I make no guarantee I'll be quick to respond to feedback or requests for correction, but I do intend to renew these slides as Victoria 3 gets patched across the future. That Alta Sanity thanks you for your time.